Hi, my name is Lance Marwood, and I'd like to welcome you to this interview with Robin Wilson, the esteemed lead vocalist of alternative rock band Gin Blossoms. As the voice behind iconic songs like Hey Jealousy and Till I Hear It From You, he's left an indelible mark on the alternative rock genre. Today we have the privilege of diving deeper into Robin's musical journey, discussing discography, time on the road, and upcoming tour with Sugar Ray that kicks off on August 31st. Thanks for speaking with us, Robin.
It's my pleasure, Lance. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Not every day you get to speak with someone who formed up a good portion of my soundtrack in a certain part of my life. So it's really exciting to speak with you.
Oh, that's cool. Well, I appreciate that you referred to me as esteemed. I don't hear that word very often. So very, very flattering and somewhat confusing, but I'll go with it.
Well, I was going to jump right into, this isn't the first time you guys have toured with Sugar Ray, is it? You guys did the Summerland tour?
No.
Yeah,
we've toured with them a few times. And then we've done, one-off gigs or weekends with them several times. So I'll just cut right to the chase. Sugar Ray is my all-time favorite band to tour with.
Oh, wow. And the first one, I believe, was it the Summerland tour in 2012? Is that right?
That was the first full-length tour. We had done a few shows with them here and there, but that was the first full-length tour. Yes.
Do you have any fond memories from that particular tour?
The entire thing is a fond memory.
Fair enough. And speaking of tours, you guys were all set to celebrate the 30th anniversary of A New Miserable Experience last year, but that was cut short in March, I believe it was, when Billeen broke his arm. Is that right?
That is correct. And then we made up all those dates, we rescheduled them, and did them all in the fall.
Right on. And looking back, though, on the anniversary of that album, how would you describe the creative process that went behind that album and its impact on your career?
I would describe it as inspired chaos. Most of the songs we put together when we were just a bar band looking for a deal, and there's a lot going on in those days. We were dealing with a lot of pressures from within and without, and as a songwriter, I was competing with Jesse and Doug, and dealing with all the roadblocks of Doug's personal complications.
Mm-hmm.
So it was an exciting time, but it was also very frustrating. And as an example, I remember that I had written several songs, but I couldn't get Doug to rehearse for like half a year before we went to make New Miserable Experience. I just could not get him to rehearse.
Wow.
He once made up a story that he got a girl pregnant just so I would feel bad enough for him that I wouldn't be worried about him canceling practice. And it's just a crazy way to be,
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, I called Jesse and I'm like, dude, we need to rehearse before we go make this album. I've got all these songs I want you guys to hear. And Jesse basically just kind of shrugged and said, I don't think it's going to happen, Rob. And I was really pissed off. very, very frustrated that I couldn't get my bandmates to, just rehearse to hear my new material.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went into those sessions, and I was under the impression that I wasn't going to have a single song that I had written on the album, and I was really pissed off. And it's difficult for me to hide my feelings. So I was basically pouting through the first several days of recording. And then finally, I guess our producer, John, realized that something was amiss with the vibe in the studio. And when I wasn't there, he called a meeting and kind of got to the root of the problem. And I guess my bandmates must have explained, oh, Robin's pissed off because he doesn't have any songs on the record. And I don't think they bothered to explain that, you know, they didn't want to rehearse for 8 months, which right. Put us in this position.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I got called into the studio, and the whole band and John were sitting there, and they're like, all right, Robin, we're going to learn one of your songs. And I was like, holy shit. Now I gotta hope that they like something in this batch of songs that I had written. And so I had a cassette that had like 7 tunes on it, and some of them were pretty good, and one of them was Until I Fall Away. And I remember there was a moment where the band kind of all sort of shrugged and said, well, if we're going to do one, maybe we should do that one. And we started learning Until I Fall Away that night. And, you know, cut to the point where the album is done. And I remember getting a phone call from our A&R guy. And he said, in reference to Until I Fall Away, he said, Robin, that's a single. That's a hit single. And I was like, wow, really? I was like, yep. That is going to be a hit.
Wow.
And I remember thinking at the time, wow, Doug is going to be really fucking jealous. So, you know, when I describe chaos and conflict in reference to those sessions, that's just a taste. It's just a small taste of what was going on at the time. We knew we had great material. We weren't thinking in terms of, you know, compared to Smashing Pumpkins or Nirvana, that this record holds up as a milestone of our generation. We weren't thinking like that. We were just thinking, you know, for what we can do within our own little world. We knew that it represented us really well. And by the time the sessions ended, and we basically had to fire Doug because he completely melted down while we were making the record, we went home from Memphis, and we didn't know if anybody was ever going to hear it. We thought we were going to get dropped. We thought that the album would never be released. We knew the band was on the verge of breaking up and ending for good. And it was a terrifying time. And I remember playing some rough mixes I went up to Portland, Oregon. I was hanging around this bar, and I ended up like putting on the rough mixes in this bar. I was talking to the bartender and explaining, you know, we just made this album, and I put it on, and I remember playing Found Out About You for him, and him like looking at me like, well, this is actually really fucking good. And I remember thinking, you might be the only person that ever hears it, you know?
Wow.
I've wondered from time to time if that dude, I don't remember who it wasn't anybody I knew very well, but I wonder if he realized when it became, you know, like a top 10 single, that he was maybe the first person in America to hear it outside of the band and the people that worked at the studio and the label. Complicated times, heartbreaking times.
And that's something that's always struck me about yourselves, is that, you know, from the start, Gin Blossoms have been this band that kind of, this is an opinion. I hear the music and it has jangle, it has pop sensibilities, but then I hear the lyrics much later on, and I've read them, and I look at this as a bittersweetness, right? And I can't help but think that that's why so many fans have connected deeply with your lyrics. I feel as though that kind of represented the 90s in general, but maybe that's just a, not nostalgia, but maybe just painting with a broad brush. And
sure. Well, we were a product of our times. We were swimming in the wake of our favorite bands. So let's say groups like REM and The Replacements, were among the touchstones that we sought to emulate. So we were a product of those times, but we also had a lot of classic rock sensibilities. Doug's biggest hero as a guitar player and songwriter was probably Pete Townsend. Certainly we were all into the Beatles, and then we had a very strong new wave influence. Bands like The Cars or The Church had a big impact on us, and I've noticed that music tends to sort of reinvent itself every 7 years. Because the kids that are in high school, they're listening to what's on the radio, and then when they're 22 years old or 23 years old, they're starting bands, and so things tend to cycle in popular music every 7 years or so.
I think there's something to that, to be fair.
We were right there on the cusp of everything that was happening, and we like so many other bands from our era, like say Nirvana, Goo Goo Dolls, Smashing Pumpkins, Soundgarden. We were all forming our bands in the late '80s and signing deals around that time, and then finally getting our recordings done in the early '90s.
Is there any specific song in your discog that still holds or has emerged to become as bittersweet as that theme? Is there any specific one that carries a lot more weight to it?
Yeah, I'd say "Hold Me Down." It's a song that Doug and I wrote together, and it was a song that meant a lot to me because we were working together on that, and I wanted it to be like the first single. And then there was a moment in the studio where Doug was so totally falling apart and just so angry and bitter. He basically told me that he was going to rewrite all of my lyrics to that song because he didn't want to share co-writing credit with me. And it's just such a hurtful, painful moment.
Damn.
And then to survive it, that song means so much to me when I hear it or when we play it. Doug and I had co-written a few things together, but that's the only song we wrote together that actually made it onto a record. And for it to be a part of New Miserable Experience, to me, it's the world to me. Yeah. It's the only proof that I have that Doug and I wrote a song together. Yeah, "Hold Me Down." "Hold Me Down." It's the one that's just so bittersweet. I'm just so proud of it, but also it's just there's so much pain associated with that tune. So fucking icicle through the heart.
Well, and I'm sure that you've hashed this out countless times for music journalists, so I can only appreciate.
Actually, you're the first journalist I've ever told that particular anecdote to, because it was all so painful. I could never talk about it in the '90s, and I've just always wanted to protect Doug. So I've never really told that story before. But I'm just kind of past. I'm at a point now where it's like it can't hurt, and I want. I just feel like I want to share the perspective of what really fucking happened.
I'm sure that there's plenty of people that would appreciate hearing your side of it. I mean, it's the only thing that's out there that somebody can look at is on a Wikipedia page. There's no quote from yourself until hopefully now. So
yeah, and I've been dealing with that since then. You know, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and I was painted as a villain by Doug, and a lot of people bought into it, and I've just had to endure that, you know. It was never easy.
I'd like to do a bit of a tone shift, if you don't mind. And I don't want to sound disingenuous, because I do really appreciate you diving in deep with me and going over some of that stuff. I know your creative process back then. I'm wondering what it's like these days. I mean, what has been influencing you the most in terms of music that you've been listening to, as an example?
Okay. I keep notes. You know, when I come up with an idea for a lyric, I either write it down in the notes application in my phone, or I actually have like a notebook that I like to carry with me and physically pull out, or like a real pen, and jot things down. And mostly I keep a list of any kind of lyric ideas that I might have, any ideas for song titles or a lyrical hook. And I keep those in a list, and then from time to time I'll hear a melody associated with something like that, and I'll sing that into my voice memos application in the phone so I don't forget it. And then also from time to time what I'll do is I'll be playing the guitar, and I'll sort of come up with a chord progression and maybe just start making up a melody. And then if I don't have a lyric associated with that experiment, what I'll do is just kind of look through my list of lyrics and see if anything sort of jumps into place in the melodies that I've been working on.
Mm-hmm.
And then also I collaborate with other people, so sometimes they'll give me a song that's already more or less half written. For example, I'm working with Jim Babjack of the Smithereens on some songs, and so Jim basically came up with the chord progression and an idea for a chorus, and you know, it's my task to complete his song, you know, and the bones of the song are already pretty much there. Mm-hmm. My job as a collaborator is just to help him finish his thought. When that's the way I've been working. I collaborated with Jesse like that. A couple of the best songs that Jim Blossoms ever wrote, like Till I Hear From You, or As Long As It Matters. Those are songs where Jesse basically came up with the basic idea of the song, and it was my job to sort of work backwards and help him sort of complete the thought. I try to stay inspired. You know, it's easy to just sort of get bored with music and just not really listen to anything new. But I make a point to try to discover new bands that seem to be carrying the torch for rock and roll. And I find that inspiring when I can find a younger band that makes me feel just as excited as I was when I was a teenager discovering new music. You know, those moments, that's why I do this, is because those moments were the most powerful moments in my life, hearing something incredible and new for the first time, like Jane's Addiction or the Pixies. The first moment I ever heard an REM song, I'll never forget that. Those are the most powerful moments that I experienced. Most of us have those moments, but for me, they were so important and powerful that they shaped who I became, what I wanted to do with my life. And there was nothing more meaningful to me than to try and be like my heroes and try to create music that could make people feel the same way those bands did to me. And a great example of that is recently I've been listening to what I consider one of the best bands of this century, group out of Louisville, Kentucky called White Reaper. They've recently released what I consider one of the best albums of the last 20, 25 years. And it's incredibly inspiring to hear something that powerful.
That's a big statement. Was that the last time that you felt that feeling of something that's really blown your hair back, where it's made you pivot in terms of what you listen to? Would you say that's the last time?
It happens from time to time. You know, I'm lucky. I've got my brother, whose name is also Lance.
Oh.
My brother Lance, from time to time, will turn me on to new music, and he recently played a band for me called, I believe it's Wildorado. Fantastic group. And then, but the most important thing he's played for me over the last, say, 10 years is a group called Bullbeat. And I think they're one of the 50 greatest rock bands of all time. And probably my favorite music that I've listened to in the last 20 years. And then he also turned me on to the Johnny Marr solo records that came out over the course of the last decade or so. Two fabulous albums.
Thank you so much for your time today, Robin. Really appreciate it, and all the best, and speak with you soon, and good luck on the upcoming tour.
Well, I sure appreciate your time, Lance. It's important to be able to promote the band, and I'm grateful to still be able to do it. And I appreciate the fact that people are interested in what I've got to say. So thank you for your time. You take it easy and rock away.